We assume humans possess an innate biological instinct for sympathy, that we are hardwired to cooperate and feel the suffering of others. Yet the historical baseline of our behavior suggests otherwise. For centuries, public torture and zero-sum cruelty were not just common, they were normative, popular entertainment. This creates a central paradox. If our biological hardware remains unchanged, why do we now feel a visceral disgust at practices our ancestors celebrated? This shift was not the result of a spontaneous intellectual enlightenment or a sudden moral awakening. Norbert Elias explored this through the concept of psychogenesis. His theory proposes that our internal emotions are shaped by the way the state centralizes power, essentially adapting our mammalian biology to fit a new social structure. To test this, we have to look at the biology Darwin actually described. While survival of the fittest is the famous shorthand, Darwin himself argued for the survival of the kindest when it came to human evolution. For early hominids, survival relied on sympathetic attunement. Communities that were more sensitive to one another were better at raising healthy offspring to reproductive age. This attunement is a physical mechanism. Tactile contact and cooperative environments stimulate the vagus nerve. This triggers oxytocin and enables trust. Activating this nerve calms the cardiovascular fight-or-flight response, creating a physiological state of calm that allows for social connection. But this biology is strictly environmentally limited. In high-threat, decentralized environments, like those of the early Middle Ages, the survival utility of the fight-or-flight response overrides the vagus nerve. While the hardware for empathy exists, a violently competitive environment prevents that software from running across a whole society. In early medieval Europe, security was a private concern. In this decentralized network, survival relied on individual martial prowess and the constant threat of violence. This was reinforced by the barter economy. Kings paid for loyalty with land, giving rivals the power to rebel. The cycle broke with monetarization. Money allowed central hubs to collect taxes directly, funding a power structure that bypassed local warriors. Central authorities used this revenue to purchase firearms and hire professional infantry. This shift eradicated the independent warrior class's monopoly on weapons. Elias called this the monopoly mechanism. The state achieves a public monopoly on both taxation and physical force. By stripping force from the individual and confining it to state specialists, the monopoly mechanism engineered a domestic environment where physical aggression was no longer a survival requirement. The disarmed nobility were absorbed into the rigid hierarchy of the court. This elite containment zone made status, rather than land, the primary currency. At the center was the king, who held an absolute concentration of power over social and economic survival. Inside this boundary, two factions were trapped together, the old nobles and the rising bourgeoisie. Elias described their relationship as an ambivalence of interests. They despised each other, but both depended on the same royal apparatus to function. Because the king outlawed physical violence, they had to defeat their rivals through self-control, manners, and the microscopic observation of others. This high-stakes pressure cooker social environment heavily rewarded the exact biological vagal response that the older, high-threat environments had previously suppressed. In a pacified hierarchy, foresight and social attunement became the supreme weapons of political survival. Over generations, this calculated self-regulation evolved into a habitus, a second nature where external political rules are internalized as automatic self-restraint. Renaissance manners books provide a fossil record of this evolution. By mapping the advice of authors like Erasmus, we can see the threshold of shame moving across history. Status became tied to the privatization of the body. Concealing nakedness and hiding natural functions became mandatory. The adoption of the fork served to distance the civilized courtier from the animalistic nature of eating with one's hands. Eventually, the public spectacle of animal slaughter and gruesome punishments vanished behind closed doors. Repugnance transitioned into physiological disgust. Steady, predictable external constraints maintained by the state eventually rewired the nervous system's baseline. Our modern sense of manners is an inherited psychological record of a multi-generational political restructuring. As societies grew more complex, upper-class self-restraint spread to the broader public. Modern global logistics networks represent an unprecedented expansion of interdependence. This interconnectedness forces nations to attune to one another's needs, replicating the ambivalence of interests on a global scale. This brings us to the paradox of pacification. Our capacity for internal empathy and cooperation relies on the continuous, looming presence of centralized state violence to keep the environment secure. Civilization is an engineered equilibrium. The state's monopoly on violence provides the mandatory secure environment for our mammalian biology to function at scale. Elias's final warning was that the habitus, the internal armor of self-restraint, is precarious. When the state's monopoly on violence fractures, environmental security disappears. The biological fight or flight response immediately overwrites centuries of psychogenetic programming the moment that human survival is once again at stake. The mid-20th century demonstrated just how rapidly this civilized conduct can crumble as industrialized societies regressed into brutal, state-sponsored barbarism. We are not at the end of the civilizing process. We are simply in a localized phase of high security. Empathy is a biological luxury. It survives only as long as the political structures enforce it.